There's some like tomfoolery for sure. Like I think most of the time I was like with the she's, theys, and gays. I think anyone who was in my masters with me will tell you that like I was Toronto's #1 defender. The TTC is also like special. Line 1 moves more people than the 401 every day. I think like, so, you know, like why aren't we doing anything? But even when people have trouble imagining how a politician could make things better, they usually have an easy time imagining a politician who's made things worse.
I'm here with Gabriel Blanc.
How you doing?
I'm chilling. So Gabe, what do you do?
Well, right now I run for city council in Ward 11, University-Rosedale.
And what does that mean?
It means a lot of knocking on doors, means a lot of attending community events, a lot of shooting videos, but just trying to reach as many people as possible in the next 6 months so that come election time on October 26th, I am the first person on people's minds when they check off their ballot.
Before we get into that a bit further, let's go to you growing up in Toronto.
Yeah.
So whereabouts did you grow up and like what was it like for you? What was your experience as a kid in Toronto?
I grew up by Bathurst and St. Clair, although before that, I suppose I grew up near Bathurst and Eglinton, right before the Crosstown LRT started construction. That was around the time that we moved. So familiar with a lot of the businesses, Yitz's and stuff that closed over the course of the construction of the Crosstown LRT. And then coming to Bathurst and St. Clair, I got to take advantage of the 512 streetcar pretty much every single day, going to and from school, going to see my friends. I grew up in a sort of part of Midtown that was where cars were ubiquitous, but I was also able to go about my daily life without ever getting a license, something I was very happy about.
Yeah, so I grew up in the suburbs and you kind of needed a license.
Yeah.
What were you doing as a kid? Were you running around, going on the TTC, or what were your hobbies?
There's some like tomfoolery for sure. Like I had a ravine near me that I would hang out with my friends in. We, you know, I feel like teenagers do a lot of just like trolling around, just like sitting on hills and
Yeah, vibes.
you know, like
Just a regular life.
a regular life.
And were you happy with it?
I was a kind of moody teenager, to be honest with you. I had a friend who was very close to me through my early years in high school, and he was a Palestinian who lived in Israel, and we got very close, and he moved back and forth a couple of times, and we sort of grew apart through that process as like he was immersed in a completely different culture and coming back here, and he was the guy who I was smoking weed with at 15 under the bridge, or
As you should.
as you should. And so like that was like a sort of a formative influence for me to have like a strong male friendship. I think most of the time I was like with the she's, theys, and gays growing up, but this was like one of my first like real like best friends. And through the process of his moving back and forth, we lost touch and eventually kind of went full no contact because there were some like real cultural differences and like differences in how we wanted to continue the friendship. And I regretted that, and it made me moodier. So, yeah.
And I imagine having that relationship at a young age, that sort of forces you to get tapped into politics, forces you to get tapped into things that are going on in the world.
You know what though? I thought of it very like apolitically. Like I also had a very privileged childhood, and so like, of course I had good months and bad months and good days and bad days, but it was easy to sort of like maybe not see the impact of government on those ebbs and flows, right? Or not see the impact of like structural injustices. It took me a while to come to appreciate that like, no, there are structures that make it so that some people have more good days and more bad days, have easier lives.
But even before we get into a broader analysis, I imagine it's just, there's a lot of morality conversations already with just him moving back and forth and just the conversations of how different the experience is compared to what you're experiencing in Canada.
Yeah.
How did that friendship inform how you saw things, how you like listened to things?
Yeah. It's a good question. I had a lot of international students in school with me, and I do think like being exposed to that range of perspectives and like, you know, there was it was sort of like impossible for me to like have trouble imagining what life was like in a different place, because like I knew that there was this broad range of experiences. I feel like maybe if you grow up in a more like cloistered, and nobody in Toronto is like this. I guess I'm imagining somebody in like rural Indiana or something. I don't know why I came up with Indiana, but like if you grow up in that kind of environment, like maybe it's hard for you to imagine that other people, other places are different from your life experience. But if you're growing up with people from all around the world, it's impossible to think that way. You like know, no matter what, like you're not going to be surprised by the breadth of the human experience. You know there are things that you don't know, right?
Totally. And there are so many different things to experience, like having a no red meat pact with your sister when you were a kid. Where did that come about, and who broke first?
I did. I did. Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Although my sister is iron deficient, so it's like, who really wins? Yeah, I think, that speaks to sort of the beginning of my political awakening, which was really about climate change. I heard about climate change in school, I think like a lot of us did, and it was like this like scientific fact with apocalyptic stakes. And then you think like, so, like, why aren't we doing anything? And then that, like, for people who grow up privileged and like maybe think of themselves as somewhat apolitical, I was what you might call like a normie lib, to be confronted with this thing that like has apocalyptic stakes and structural causes, and we're not really doing much about it. It like, once you start asking yourself questions about that, you start to confront the like structures in our society that lead to all sorts of other injustices, right? Like, so I think, and for me, it also led to like a very like principled moral approach. Like I didn't want to do certain things in order to mitigate my impact on the climate. Like I felt like the moral weight of it was like overwhelming. I have to be doing something about it. And once the red meat pact stopped feeling like enough, so that was me and my sister coordinating not to eat red meat so that we could, which is some of the worst stuff that you can eat for the climate. Once that stopped feeling like being enough, it was like, okay, well, what am I going to do beyond that? And acknowledging that it's like a systemic issue, it's about confronting the system head on. So I joined a number of climate and environmental activist groups. I joined the Green Party. I like became involved in like formal partisan politics for the first time. And I guess in a way, it's been like many years since then, but like everything has been an escalation from there.
And could you describe more of that experience of transitioning from politics being something you had discussions and conversations with your friends about to politics being something you actually did stuff about?
Right. Yeah, I think the COVID-19 pandemic was definitely this moment. It was another like, again, like there's just this feeling of like rupture, or like it was discussed in apocalyptic terms. And you saw many, many people dying, and you saw the structures that made those tragedies unevenly distributed, like inequities in healthcare, inequities in education as well, with the impact that COVID had on schools. It was sort of undeniable that our common interests had to be managed by like people who had our common interests at heart. And I didn't feel like that was Doug Ford, having been sort of radicalized into anti-Ford positions very early on. I guess when he was elected, I was 17, and I already sort of had a sense that his politics were not going to be things that I agreed with. So feeling like there was this like gap in leadership through a period of crisis, and that like folksy management was not going to be the solution, but like, a lot of the worst things that he did for the pandemic happened before 2020. It was things like legalizing and deregulating private long-term care. Like that led to a huge discrepancy in terms of mortality rates for seniors who were in public long-term care versus private long-term care. So a lot of those things got me thinking much more seriously about the social consequences of political decisions, and it felt sort of impossible to ignore that, like, who is in charge matters. you know? And people can be really frustrated with electoralism. I know a lot of people who are really frustrated with electoralism, but even when people have trouble imagining how a politician could make things better, they usually have an easy time imagining a politician who's made things worse. And so, of course, who's in charge matters.
Every leader will say some version of what you said, of proclaiming that they themselves are the leadership, or they have ideas that are actually good for the people versus the other parties. Mm-hmm. How does a voter sift through the rhetoric and understand like who actually cares about me versus who's actually just saying that they do?
Yeah, I project from my own experience onto others a lot when it comes to this, and it's definitely a flaw because what I do is I'm a platform purist. I like absolutely from the beginning loved reading through the ideas of different platforms and just like which of these do I agree with the most, which of these do I think is like going to be best for the country or the province or the city, which is part of what led me to the Green Party initially. In 2019, when I first voted for them, they had this awful slogan, not left, not right, forward, which I thought was just like inane, you know, and sort of meaningless and vague. But I read through their platform and it didn't look like not left to me, right? I liked it because it was very firm on progressive policies that I cared a lot about: guaranteed livable income, universal pharmacare, universal post-secondary education, like those things that I cared about a lot and that motivated my politics. It was like pretty strong and pretty on the left. So that's what led me to the Green Party initially, was just like the strength of the platform. And I think since then, here's what I'd say. Everyone says like, of course, like I have the qualities of a strong leader that my opponent lacks. And, but I still want to be judged on my ideas, right? I still like, and throughout this campaign for city council, I'm going to be trying to put a lot of policy out there because that's what I would want to see from somebody that I plan on voting for, is like, I know what mandate I'm giving you. It's a mandate to do this, that, and the other thing. So that sort of is, that's our accountability mechanism, right? And of course, a lot of people make promises and break them, but that's a part of the accountability mechanism, is that then you get to vote them out. Like, I really do believe that the strength of the policy through a campaign can be defining for a politician.
A lot of the mandate that you seem to prescribe seems to revolve around some idea of morality and some idea of these feelings of what is good. And it's a very like human perspective. It's not really coming from an economic perspective. It's not really coming from a business sort of thing. Yeah. It just seems like this morality point is really, really important to you, and I just wonder where that comes from.
That's a good question. I don't think I could point to any like particular moral quandary like early on in my life that caused me to think of things in these ways. Like, I don't want to be economically illiterate. I certainly care about the economy, but I don't think it's the way to reach the most people. It is in terms of talking about like, especially the kind of people who are attracted to the kind of politics that I'm putting out there. Like, you're not going to mobilize them by talking about GDP per capita year over year. I think about this a lot when it comes to housing discourse, because I think a lot of the people who are supportive of some of the policies that can help bring rents down usually frame them in some sort of like classical liberal discussion of like removing barriers to supply that will not only be good for like housing prices over the long term, but will also be good for like growth, whether it's GDP growth or housing supply growth. And I guess the way that I feel sometimes when I listen to people who are trying to pitch renters that like pro-housing policies are going to be good for them in the long term, and then they couch it in this discussion of GDP growth, what I end up thinking is always like, you know, you're kind of speaking Bay Street to them, and that's like not how you motivate people. Like, to me, part of the reason that I want to make it easier to build affordable housing in Toronto is not because of GDP growth. although maybe that's like a helpful side benefit, but it's because this city is premised on the ability for that working class people can move here. And that's how almost everyone in this city, whether it was them or one generation back or two generations back, that's the reason the city exists, is because working class renters were able to move here. And so the ideology of Toronto is full, or that, you know, we have all of the affordable housing that we need, I find really frustrating, but also just like, I think it rubs up against some sort of moral frustration that a lot of Torontonians are going to have hearing that sort of discussion, because it's like, what right does that generation have to pull up the ladder behind them when, you know, if the same thing had been said 100 years before, we'd still be a shanty town, Muddy York or whatever.
And is that the feeling you get, that you, peers, people that you talk to in the community feel like the ladder has been pulled up?
Oh, absolutely. Oh my gosh. I think like the feelings of the intersection of class frustration and generational frustration is really palpable. There's a feeling that like boomers got theirs and left others behind. Not that they didn't work for it, but that a lot of the economic conditions that made it possible for them to end up in that situation haven't been replicated for generations that followed them. I think the economics is pretty solid on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a plethora of graphs you could bring up, whether it's like, yeah, the wage tied to inflation, nominal wage, like, yeah, there's all these sort of ideas of how the economy has shifted, and the sort of bargain that we get in society is different. Let's take a little bit of a fast forward into the future. And so you finish up Brown, and at some point a year or so later, you end up at the UN. Walk me through that.
I was already interested in Canadian politics, and even though I was living in the States, I never really had an interest in American politics. Beyond all of the nastiness that usually comes with it, I also just found it less interesting. Like, I cared about things that happened in Toronto much more than things that happened in Providence, Rhode Island, although I love Providence. So I had this interest in Canadian politics, but I had a girlfriend who was American, and so because of that, we had to figure out some way to get a visa to stay together. And I knew that the United Nations was had really good internship opportunities. I was interested in education in addition to politics at the time. My brother was training to be a teacher, or looking to train to be a teacher. I was thinking about training to become a teacher. And so I thought, okay, well, if I want a United Nations internship, I can do that in sort of the division of the United Nations that has the most to do with education, which was UNICEF. And I ended up working at a sort of subdivision of UNICEF that was called Education Cannot Wait, that was all about helping children access education in emergencies. If there's a war or a famine, how are funds raised and supplies delivered so that not-for-profits can continue to provide education in these conflict zones and minimize the disruption to children's education.
Could you give a bit more insight as to how your team might have triaged where to put the resources? Because I imagine, like, you know, talking about the world, there's so many...
There's a lot going on.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
No, I mean, and it was incredibly overwhelming. Like, I think one of the things that I learned working there was just how much there is going on in terms of things that can interrupt a child's education. You know, Bangladesh, Ethiopia, these were huge priorities for us. But I also started working there on October 3rd, 2023. So you can imagine, like, there was some discussion of like famines and wars all over the world, but you know, starting mid-October with Israel's ground invasion of Gaza, like, that was one of the most overwhelming disruptions to children's education anywhere in the world. And so there was a lot of focus on that. The United Nations broadly was very focused on that, and in calls for a ceasefire. And that ended up being a lot of my work for the 6 months that I was there.
I imagine it's a bit of an impossible question. How do you weigh the impact to a child's education in Bangladesh compared to the impact of a child's education in Palestine? There's no real quantifiable sort of, okay, that education has been impacted by minus 10 points, this is by minus 13. Well,
Right.
it's really sort of up in the air. So, yeah, could you just describe more of the experience of sort of deciding, because at the end of the day, you only have so many hours, and these are such important topics. You sort of have to delegate and choose what you talk about and what you work on. And there's probably times where you felt like, I should have talked about this other thing, but I have to talk about this, and the feelings associated with that and how you sort of navigated that.
Yeah, that's a good question. Those decisions were often above my pay grade, but I think like a lot of internships, like there's frustration about certain decisions that set in over time. It was a fixed term contract, and at the end of that contract, I felt like I still wanted to work at the United Nations, but I wanted to work in something that was closer to my interest in cities, and that's what led me to UN Habitat, which was a fantastic experience as well.
So then, after that and after the UN Habitat stuff, you come back to Toronto, you end up in Shelley Carroll's office. What is the work that you're most proud of there at City Council?
Good question. Great question. Thank you. Couple of things in Shelley Carroll's office. I got the opportunity to work on a couple of motions, one of which was passed at committee, and that was probably the one that I was most proud of. It was about creating a defibrillator-access bylaw for high-rises in Toronto. My own mom had a heart attack, which she survived thanks to bystander CPR and also paramedics, and she was defibrillated, as a lot of people who have a cardiac arrest are. But she was on the 5th floor of a high-rise. And in Toronto, there was a study that was done that above the 5th floor, your odds of survival go down by half. And above the 12th floor, I want to say, there are no survivors for a cardiac arrest. So there's huge inequities, right? And Toronto is simultaneously getting older and it's getting taller. So I had the idea that this is something the city could take on, whether it be through zoning or building code or community benefits, but there must be some way. And Shelley Carroll, Councillor Carroll, loved the idea, and we worked together and we got a motion passed at committee. We also had the support of experts from the Heart and Stroke Foundation and the AED Foundation of Ontario, who helped us sort of refine it and then made deputations that got it over the finish line. Well, sorry, it's not at the finish line yet, I should say. It's coming to council in 2027, and that's when we'll be able to get it over the finish line.
Gotcha. And I feel like with a lot of these things, like you mentioned the study and how it changes depending on what floor you're on, there's a lot of facts like that out there. There's a lot of, this is what's wrong, this is what's bad, and it's hard to ground the statistics in an actual lived experience.
Yeah.
But it sounds like this defibrillator project comes to you from a moment with your mom. Could you describe, and like from the beginning to the end of like that actual day where you got the phone call that this happened, and
Oh gosh,
sort of
sure.
yeah, how that informed your thinking? Because yeah, it's an impactful moment for you, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was. I think I got the phone call at around 10 p.m. My dad was with her, and I joined them both at the hospital. And I think for the first 24 hours, 48 hours even, it wasn't really clear what the outcome was going to be. Probably had less than 50% chance of making it. And at some point things turned around. The doctors did really, really great work. She had just like a fantastic team of people attending to her. And I also just remember in the week that followed where we stayed with her, just like such a great team of nurses taking care of her as she started her recovery. The full recovery took like a month, right? There was rehab afterwards. There were all sorts of procedures.
And there's a thread I kind of want to try to pull out here of, I imagine there's a time in which now, thankfully, the worst is over. It does seem like she's going to recover, but you're still sitting there and you're still thinking that I'm politically engaged, I'm doing stuff, and you're drawing on your lived experience. Could you describe more of that experience of just thinking, what can I do about this? And then actually the process of finding out what policy needs to be changed.
Yeah, I don't think it was immediate. I think the trauma of it was probably what was overwhelming me for the first few months. And it was only after she was fully recovered that in conversations, like, we started talking about what had happened and how it happens to other people and how not everyone is so lucky. Like, sometimes in the moment of an event like that, you're really focused on yourself, and it's hard to draw out those bigger things, right? Like, you're like really thinking about the specificity of the experience and not the way that it's generalizable. And I think it takes time and a lot of thought to be able to say, oh, okay, like, just because I'm through this doesn't mean everyone is so lucky. So.
Was there a moment, a conversation where that idea first popped into your head where you're like, oh yeah?
We were on a vacation, I think. It was like our first vacation after she had recovered and had been sort of settled into a new routine, that we were sitting over tea and talking about it. And I was like, oh, that's like a municipal issue. I hadn't been working in municipal government yet. Actually, I was just about to move to Montreal to start my Master's of Public Policy at McGill when we had this conversation. But I thought, like, well, that's municipal government, and that's actually the level of government that's always interested me the most.
Any reason?
That municipal government's always interested me the most? Absolutely. I, like, love cities. I was able to take the streetcar every day growing up, and, like, have that independence as a kid. And, like, live in a neighborhood where I could walk to shops.
I'm honestly so jealous. Like, growing up in Mississauga, it's actually like a completely different experience.
Sorry to like rub it in. No, but like, and I was able to then move to Providence, Rhode Island, which is much more suburban. I also like have family in France, and I've spent some time in Paris, and like one of the best subway systems in Europe. Spending time in New York when I was working at UNICEF, and being able to take one of the biggest, or I guess the biggest subway system in North America. Like, being able to experience great cities, and also remembering from my childhood and from my adolescence, like all of the ways in which Toronto is a great city. You live in Montreal, I'll tell you, you experience a lot of Toronto slander. A lot of Toronto slander, and I think anyone who was in my master's with me will tell you that, like, I was Toronto's #1 defender, always calling it the greatest city in Canada, the greatest city in the world, because there are many amazing things about Toronto.
You've traveled all over, you've worked all over, but you still claim Toronto as one of your favorite cities. Why?
Great question. I think, like, as a baseline, my favorite stat to remember is that more than half of the people who live in the city weren't born in Canada. I think that's awesome. It's really unique. It's part of the reason we have like such a vibrant cultural scene, so many festivals, such good food. That's what I always tell people about the food. I mean, and like tell people about my favorite restaurants. We have every kind of town. We got a little Italy, a little Portugal, a Koreatown, a Chinatown. We got everything when it comes to kinds of towns to have.
So it's the people.
It's the people. I mean, yeah, of course. But also, you know, I don't underrate the infrastructure. I think if you've lived in a smaller city or town, it becomes very hard to bash on the TTC. I mean, of course, there's problems with the TTC, and I'm going to spend a lot of my campaign talking about those problems. But like, having lived in other places, the TTC is also like special. Line 1 moves more people than the 401 every day. I mean, it's just like it's like the backbone of this city, and by extension, like the economy of Ontario and the entire country. And Line 2 is awesome, and usually more reliable than Line 1, and takes you to like so many cool places. Some of the infrastructure, like the Bloor Viaduct, the fact that the undercarriage for carrying those subways was built 50 years before it was ever used for trains. The fact that we have this amazing network of streetcar tracks, which even though most cities in North America and around the world did away with their streetcars, like we kind of repurposed those for modern streetcars and trams. There's just like many amazing things about the city of Toronto. But yes, at its core, it really is about the people that like over many generations, people from all over the world, but also like people from close to home. One of the graphic designer on my team moved here from Chatham, Kent, and they're responsible for so many of the, I think, pretty great graphic design that we've put out so far. And like, yeah, they came to Toronto from Chatham, Kent to practice graphic design. And like, that to me is as much a part of the story of Toronto as people moving from, you know, much further away. Like, we're a city that welcomes people from near and far, and that has been able to grow over the long term by doing that.
So you have this enthusiasm. I share your enthusiasm.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned before, Toronto actually gets a bad rep. Like, a lot of people love to shit on it. Why do you think that is if it's so great? Like, I fucking love it here.
Some parts of city living are just like hard as a baseline. Like, you have to share space with people. And sometimes they're going to be loud, and sometimes they're going to be annoying. You're going to be bumping into them on the sidewalk or stuck behind them in traffic on the street. Like, there's a cost to sharing space with people. There are also just tremendous benefits of opening yourself up to sharing space with people. You know, like, my upstairs neighbor is a violinist, and I have a violinist and an oboist, oboe player who live above me, and like, yeah, like, I hear them practicing, and sometimes it's frustrating late at night to hear them playing the violin and the oboe, but also, like, they're part of the reason Toronto has a music scene. That musicians, whether they're from Chatham-Kent or, you know, Shanghai, can come here and can afford to rent and can afford an education where they can become good at music and contribute to the cultural scene that we have here. Like, there's a cost to living in cities. There's a lot to complain about. I don't actually think we're alone in having a municipal culture that is sometimes a little negative. Like, I'll tell you, New Yorkers are the same way. New Yorkers complain about scaffolding, and they complain about traffic, and they complain about the subway smelling bad, and they also, like, love their city. And I think it's just like, what are you acknowledging in that moment? The costs of living together, or the benefits, like the fun part, the community. I think it's like the most powerful thing in the world that cities enable us to have more by sharing more.
And you can't decouple the two.
No, you can't. Well, listen, I mean, I'm not going to pretend like the city of Toronto is perfect. I think if it was, I would not be running for city council. But I'm also running for city council because I love Toronto and I believe in the potential that it has to be an even greater city. I mean, to be a world-class city, which, you know, is thrown around a lot, but having seen a lot of cities, I think Toronto has that potential. We're sort of like an adolescent city at a real turning point. And it's, do we embrace the potential of living together, of sharing more, and by extension of having more nicer things, or do we leave a lot on the table?
And what do you think, in these ideas of why you're running and what you think, where Toronto has to grow, what are those opportunities? What transforms Toronto into the young adult of tomorrow?
Yeah, I think we have to have livelier and better managed public spaces. I think more pedestrianization that opens up more spaces to people hanging out, making new friends, enjoying music, enjoying a coffee together. There's been a lot of pedestrianization discussed so far. Recently, I spoke to the Toronto East York Community Council about a pedestrianization plan for Church Street in the Gay Village. But then there's also opportunities for like activating our parks more. A lot of that is going to come from looking at the Parks Department and how we can restructure it such that park staff take ownership over certain places. As of right now, I believe there's an Auditor General's report that showed that park staff spend more than 50% of the time not in Toronto parks while they're on the clock. So they're spending a lot of time in pickup trucks in between parks. And that's like not good value for money for Torontonians who have a local park. They want to know that the park staff that they're depending on to keep it clean, to keep it nice, to plan activations, to welcome vendors potentially, that those staff are also committed and dedicated to a particular park. So that's one thing I'd like to look at. And then the last thing is that we should be prioritizing ways to share space in transportation. You know, public transportation at its core is about how much more we can get when we bundle our commutes. If we were all in individual cars, and more than 90% of cars are usually occupied by just one person, we're much less efficient at getting around. And if we bundle those commutes together, if we put those 50 people in a streetcar, a lot of people are moving faster and more affordably. And also it's obviously better for the environment, which was sort of how I got turned on to this stuff. So to that end, like, why don't we give those streetcars dedicated space? Right now, a lot of the time, they kind of suck. They're only on time 60% of the time. They have a 60% satisfaction rate. The statistics show that they're the slowest streetcars in the world. To me, like, that's a crisis, and that needs to be rectified within the next 4 years with some pretty ambitious initiatives, maybe taking lessons from the King Street pilot, maybe taking lessons from the changes that were made to the 512 St. Clair streetcar, to make the streetcars in Ward 11 University-Rosedale, which include Bathurst, Spadina, College, and Dundas, like, get those working properly so that they can be useful for commuters. That's going to take pressure off of our streets with cars, and it's going to take pressure off of our subways.
Totally. So let's entertain the idea you do win. 2030 comes. What's changed for the residents of University-Rosedale?
Okay, well, if there's one streetcar that I think needs a real facelift, it's the 506 College. So something is going to be different with the 506 College. I'm working with my team on what the details of that specifically are going to be, but it's going to be moving a lot faster. You're going to be able to reliably count on those 6-minute headways, so that if, like me, you live at Harvard Street and you're trying to go east and downtown, you know, you could walk north to Bloor and hop on line 2, but it might be just as convenient for you to walk south and try and get on the 506. It's going to give a lot more people access to the businesses and the cultural events that happen in Little Italy. And I think we're going to have a much livelier part of town around College Street. That's one thing. I think also parks like Christie Pitts, Bickford Park, Ramsden Park, those huge parks are going to have a lot more activations planned, and they're going to be real, like, hubs, community hubs for the people who live around there. And then the last thing is you're going to have somebody on council who is under 30 years old, who is going to be reminding the other councillors what it is like to be young, to depend on public transit, to want to go out and experience the city and, like, be dependent on municipal infrastructure to be able to have fun and have a good 20s. And not be spending more than half of their income on rent, which more than half of people under 30 do in this city.
Yeah, there's a real generational divide that, you know, I'm excited by a lot of the young people getting engaged, because we just need both sides of the aisle to speak their opinion. You know, it's overwhelmingly older people's opinion who's relevant right now. And our voice needs to be seemingly just as relevant.
I had an amazing experience at my campaign launch party, actually in this bar a few days ago, where I was approached by a 16-year-old who came to the event with her sister, and she, like, was very nervous to ask her first ever question of a politician. I didn't know that I like had that kind of aura about me.
Yeah, you're getting there.
But she was like, I'm 16 and I want a place to hang out where I don't need to drink alcohol. And there are virtually no nice public spaces in this city where you can do that. And so I started talking to her about the seasonal pedestrianization of Church Street and plans that have been made to pedestrianize Kensington Market or the Ossington Strip. And, like, you can experience this city, hopefully by the time I'm done, in a way where you don't need to get carted at the door, right? And it's, like, more accessible to everyone. I just found, like, I don't know how many people on council currently are getting approached by 16-year-olds and addressing their concerns directly.
What do you think is being lost in not hearing these younger people's voices? Because some might argue that, so what? So what, the 16-year-old doesn't get to have an opinion?
Yeah.
What's being
They don't
lost?
get to have a vote, right? I mean, that's part of it. But let's be clear, like, it doesn't stop at 16. I think if you look at voter turnout patterns, it can be people up to 35 who are broadly disengaged from municipal politics. A lot of the time that's because they're not homeowners, and homeowners feel much more that they have a stake in municipal politics. But the fact is, like, everyone has a stake in municipal politics. If you live in this city, you depend on city services. And it doesn't matter that you've owned your home for 20 years or if you're a student who moved here 2 years ago, you depend on city services, and your politicians should be accountable to your needs. So the way that I feel about it is, I mean, I don't want to open this whole can of worms, but when I saw the voter turnout by age band in the New York City mayoral Democratic primary where Zorhan had flipped it and had younger people turning out the most in a municipal primary election, I thought, okay, it is possible to engage a different kind of constituency. And if you look at Ward 11, University-Rosedale, 40% of people are under 34, right? So this is a place where young people, because of the University of Toronto, but also because of some of the little remaining affordable rental stock in this city, have settled. And their needs need to be heard, and I think a different kind of politics could engage them and could actually sort of reverse the trends that lead to only more established homeowners ever being heard by city councilors. Not that I don't want to, the fact that these more established homeowners usually feel like they have the biggest stake in municipal elections, I respect that and I'm going to listen to them, but I'm also going to make a proactive effort to broaden the constituency.
And so let's entertain the opposite example.
Sure.
Let's say, for whatever reason, unsuccessfully, your campaign ends with you not winning. How are you still going to support the community, and how do you still look to be involved in University-Rosedale?
That's a great question. Well, I live here, so I'm going to be around for sure. And in terms of what can be done to support the community, I'm going to be continuing to make noise around municipal issues. The activism that I've done up until now has been very focused on municipal government, whether that's the Church Street pedestrianization or the creation of discounted single ride fares for students on the TTC. These are issues that are important to me, and I'm not going to stop making noise about them either. Another thing is that I'm very interested in the young people who are freshly engaged through this campaign in municipal politics, converting that into an engagement in their community writ large, whether that's a tenants union or a residents association. I've had young people turning out to events who have never been engaged in politics before, and win or lose, I want them to stay engaged. So to find some sort of structure, things that are local to them, that can keep them engaged. And I'll tell you that, at least with residents associations that I've spoken to so far, they love this idea. They acknowledge often that their membership skews older, and they would really welcome a diversity of perspectives. I would like to help sort of transition a lot of the volunteers who have put so much work into this campaign already into helping something else.
Total. And I think that's all the questions for me. So if you could just look at that camera, and if you have a last sort of message to someone who's just heard about you for the first time.
Yeah, sure. Hey, Toronto. I just had a fantastic conversation. I'm very excited for you to hear more about my plan to lower rents and shorten commutes in Ward 11, University-Rosedale. Policy coming soon. Thanks so much for following along with my campaign so far. Doors will open on the left.